All right, so with the triggers in place, I'm just going to save that, and you can preview it in your browser as well, and voila, you now have three images next to each other. Now, to get these images to look the way we want them to have them align the way we want them to, I'm going to be adding a couple of little CSS bits of information later on, and we'll be addressing that soon enough. Now, before we leave our HTML, we need to also do something else, and that is to address what the overlays will actually be. So check this out. I'm going to just come in here and we're going to put in a little HTML comment here as well. And this one, I'm just going to say overlays. So what are the overlays and how are they going to work? Well, the overlays are really just going to be divs. So let's start off by putting in a div. And this div should have a class. And the class name that I'm going to be giving mine is simple underscore overlay. Remember, we got to get these names exactly correct in order for them to be working properly. So simple overlay, but I'm also going to be including an ID for this particular file. And the ID we're going to call frog1. Again, you might notice that the name of the rel attribute in the first image, the thumbnail image, is called frog1. And here, the overlaid div is called frog1. The ID of it is called frog1 at least. So that gives us important information that we're going to need in order to get this to work properly the way we want it to. All right, with that done, I'm going to just put a forward slash on my div to close it. Now within this div, maybe I'll just indent that a little bit. First of all, we're going to have a large image. So I'll put in my img tag. And the source for this image here is again going to be included inside the images overlay folder. So I'll just copy this and I'll place that in here. And we're going to give it the name frog underscore over 1.jpg. So frog over 1.jpg. Now that's the image that we want to see appearing here. And remember, we are working in HTML5, so I don't really need to put the self-enclosing forward slash here either. All right, with that done, we are going to also need inside this overlaid div the one with the class simple overlay. Remember, it has an image inside of it, but there's also some text inside of it next to it. So we're going to create another div within this one. So in other words, it's a little nested div. And this nested div is going to have a class as well. And we're going to give this class the name details. Simple name, which pretty much describes exactly what this is going to do. Now, before I forget, I'm going to forward slash close the details div, just to keep us nice and neat. We're going to include a h3 headline. Again, you can make it whatever you want, doesn't really matter. And I'm just going to call this Killer Frog 1. All right. So within this, I'm also going to include a little bit of HTML. So nothing really fancy. Maybe I'll just come in here and copy this first line. Notice I've got a an opening P, but I do need to close that P tag as well. Good. So we've got our first div and our first overlay. And if you remember, it's got our containing simple overlay class div with an image inside of it, and then a div called details that has a h3 and a paragraph. Okay, let's copy this information, and just to save some time, I'm going to paste it again inside here. We're going to change the ID to frog2, change the image to frog over 2, and here Killer Frog 1, we'll say Killer Frog 2. I don't need to really make many changes on the paragraph text. It's just pretty simple. So with that done, I'm going to do it one more time, paste it one more time rather, and we're going to change all the 1s to 3s. Okay, so at this point we've got the overlay information, the triggers in place. If I were to press save and preview this in the browser, well, you would see, the overlays showing right away, and that's obviously something we don't want. But nevertheless, we're going to now implement some JavaScript to help us with this as well. So before we leave, it's really simple to implement this line of code. Now you'll notice that in the overlay, I've left you with the full jQuery tools min.js. Now the one thing about this line that we copied for use with the previous slide tabs is that we are now going to have the same options available to us for use with overlays. So we don't really have to make any changes to this at all. Alright, so it's just got the basic jQuery tools information inside of it, and the only other thing we need to do with regards to our JavaScript is to, right after our less than IE9, remember that's a shiv for HTML5. So what I'm going to do in here is to just declare a script tag. So let's put in our basic script. And before we forget, I'm just going to copy this information so we can put in our / closing script tag. All right, so with that information in place, I'm now going to write the simple little line of code that we will need to make this work. First of all, I'm just going to set up document.ready. Now you might be wondering again, what is the document.ready? It's just telling us that we're ready to use this script. We didn't use it in the previous one because you don't always have to write this when you're dealing with jQuery tools or jQuery in general. But since I'm here, I'm going to show it to you, and I'm just going to say document, and we'll put a bracket here, and we'll write in .ready. All right, with the document.ready, we're going to include a function. So we started the last one just with the function, and either way, it will be perfectly fine. So I have a curly bracket right here, and within this area is where we're going to put in our simple little line of text that's going to help us to make this overlay work. It could not be simpler. Check this out. All we got to do is to define that any image, so here's the img, and I'm putting in a square bracket here, and we're going to say rel, and that's going to reference the relative attribute that we have in our image tag, if you remember that. So with that in place, what do you want to do to the image with the attribute rel? Well, we're just going to say .overlay. And the .overlay is really all we need. But before we do anything else, let's close up our script. So I'm going to put in my closing curly bracket and our closing bracket. Is that it? Yes, that's all we need, if you can believe it. So at this particular moment, if I were to save this and take a look inside Safari, nothing's really happening. Although you can see that, hey, wait a minute, check this out. When I click on these elements, there's no close tab. But when I did click on one of them, it actually showed me Killer Frog, and Killer Frog 1 was in here. There's Killer Frog 2 and Killer Frog 3. So that information is now visible right here. If I were to refresh this, for example, see there's Killer Frog 1 and Killer Frog 2 and 3, and take a look. If I were to open up this one, see Killer Frog 3 seems to be missing from there. And it's overlaid, it's showing us what's happening, but it's not really looking the way I want it to. So what we're going to do when we come back is to work on the CSS that's going to get this thing to show up exactly the way we want to. But as you can see, just the simple functionality of having the overlay working with these buttons is really quite simple to implement. So it's very, very easy to get all of these changes set up. So come back in the next video and we're going to set up the CSS to make this work.